As a fitness professional, you know the joy of helping others, and you know it's more than just fitness. We're training the whole person. Wellness coaching provides expertise that goes beyond fitness and nutrition. It's a holistic approach to helping others become their best selves while reaching their goals. To us, there's no greater joy than that. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified wellness coach. Go to nasm.org/wellness.
Well, hello there, listeners. Welcome to this week's episode of the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall, and what an apt week to be doing this show. We plan our show schedule out weeks, if not sometimes months in advance. And of all the weeks, this week we're about to have a heat bubble. No, I think it's called a heat dome. So this week we're going to have a heat dome here in North America. It normally doesn't get into the high 90s here in upstate New York until sometime in like late July to August. But tomorrow it's going to be 98 degrees here. And I have no illusions that is that bad because it's probably going to feel pretty balmy to my friends in Texas and Arizona, where the heat's going to be a little bit dangerous. And so I think it's kind of funny dare I be woo-woo and say like the synchronicity of doing an episode about the sunscreen debate in a week that we're going to have record high temperatures all over the country. So being a child of parents who baby oiled back in the 70s, and for those of you young enough to not know what that means, essentially back in the like 60s, 70s, 80s, people would lather themselves in baby oil and roast outside, kind of like you would oil up a rotisserie chicken so that the skin gets nice and brown and crispy. That's what your parents and grandparents, many of them, were doing. And so being a child of parents who baby oiled, and both of whom now have had skin cancer cells removed from their faces and their backs, I can remember being absolutely shocked when a couple of years ago, the utility and necessity of sunscreen was being called to the carpet. Now, if you are not at all familiar with the debate, let me set the stage for you. There are some people out there on the interwebs running about calling into question, should we be wearing sunscreen? Is sunscreen actually dangerous? Is it actually bad for us? And I am a person who generally keeps an open mind kind of about everything, so that when enough people are out there asking a question, I'll go, well, maybe there's something here. And I can remember, like 6-8 years ago, people are talking about anti-inflammatory compounds in food. And I remember clients thinking it was ridiculous that I was thinking about like ginger and turmeric. And of course, now we know curcumin, which is a bioactive compound in turmeric, is anti-inflammatory. So for thousands of years, Ayurvedic practitioners were saying, warming spices are anti-inflammatory. And now we know it's true, right? Enough people said it. I went off and drew my own conclusions. So I'm coming in to the sunscreen debate going, is there something here? And my dear listeners, that's what today's episode is all about. So for starters, because if you haven't heard of the sunscreen debate, it probably seems really odd to you that anyone would ask these questions. But if you're somebody who's like, sunscreen debate curious, let's just cover how did we get here? Because as an 80s and 90s kid, it was abundantly clear growing up. Every dermatologist would say, wear sunscreen. People are living longer. If you're going to live into your 80s, your 90s, now we're saying your hundreds, you don't want to get melanoma. So it's obvious, take care of your skin, right? But the buzz out there online saying, well, maybe it's wrong. So to understand the sunscreen debate in its totality, you've got to start by understanding that there are two types of sunscreen. There's a mineral type, right? Naturally occurring minerals. We take them out of the ground. And then there's chemical sunscreens. So those are synthetic compounds that work differently in like the mechanism of action. So I used to be back in the like 2010s, like 2016, 2017, I used to be super into biohacking. And I first started hearing biohacker podcasts that I was like all about. I worshiped these people, saying that they didn't wear sunscreens and sunblocks most of the time. And a few of them would say like, yeah, but if I do, I wear a mineral sunscreen. They would say zinc oxide, which we're going to talk about later in the episode. But zinc oxide is that stuff that makes you like all pasty white. It's difficult to wash off. It goes on pretty thick. Like you've probably seen the like jokey references of like the summer like lifeguard at the summer pool who's got the white stuff on their nose. That's zinc oxide. That's what that is. It's a mineral sunblock. And so the big hoopla about sunscreens is mostly about chemical sunscreens. So a sunblock, a mineral sunblock, goes on top of the skin and creates a barrier where UV light can't penetrate to your skin. A sunscreen, a chemical sunscreen, works differently. The chemicals absorb the UV rays instead of creating a very barrier. And so those are like the invisible sunscreens. Again, as a 90s kid, as an elder millennial, I remember there were these like colorful ones that you'd like slather yourself in like purple lotion to make sure you didn't miss a spot. And then it would disappear when you rubbed it in. And they were expensive. So we didn't use them at my household, but I thought they were super cool. So that's all chemical sunscreens, excuse me. So how did we go from everybody should wear sunscreen to the current debate? Well, in 2019 and 2020, the FDA put out two statements that kind of grossly accelerated this whole argument. So the first one was the FDA put out a statement that they were requesting information from chemical sunscreen manufacturers about what was in their product. So at that time, there was no requirement for them to put it on the bottle, what the actual chemicals in the bottle were. And that's true of most cosmetics. Like most of the stuff we're putting on our skin, we don't really know what's in it because most manufacturers are not publishing those formulas and formulations. And because at the time, there really wasn't a public demand to do so. So in 2019, the FDA is like, hey, why don't you all tell us what's in these bottles? And then the second one in 2020, the FDA comes out and says that there are common chemicals in sunscreen that are absorbed through the skin into the bloodstream, but we don't actually know if they're harmful. And the number one culprit from this report, the number one, everybody freaked out about it. If you go out on the internet and you start absorbing this on social media, it's oxybenzone. So personally, by this time, I had switched to mineral sunscreens anyway. I was in my 30s. Who cares if I look hot on the beach? I don't care if I'm pasty, right? But now we're starting to get this groundswell. Like I'm the weirdo who's out there doing the weird thing. My whole family is still doing the other thing. They all think I'm nuts, but whatever. So FDA puts out their first one saying, hey, maybe you should tell us what's in here. The second one saying, these chemical compounds are showing up in our blood and therefore our urine. That's how they tested for it in the body. And then in 2021, an independent lab publishes a study showing that known carcinogenic compounds are in many popular sunblocks, that they were extra compounds added to these sunblocks. They're known carcinogens. We know they're being absorbed to the skin. Coppertone puts out this huge recall. And just about the same time that all of that was happening, Hawaii bans the sale of most chemical sunscreens because of the overwhelming evidence that they bleach coral reefs and they are damaging the ocean ecosystem and accelerating ecosystem collapse. That all sounds pretty bad to me. Hopefully you agree. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I am your host, Darlene Marshall. We are talking about the sunscreen debate, but wait, there's more. So we've got the FDA saying, hey, maybe you should tell us what's on the bottle. Then we got the FDA saying, that stuff gets absorbed through the skin. So it's in your bloodstream. And then we've got an independent lab going, hey, some of that stuff, known carcinogens. In the wake of all of that, you get some popular content creators who get on the horn. They are jumping on the old bandwagon. And that is in many ways understandable to me. It is our job as content creators to make content that people want to consume. People are talking about sunscreen. That is why we are doing this episode. But to go down a little tiny rabbit hole here, personally, I do think that there is a necessary ethic to content creation. I think that I am obligated to figure out and get as close to something truthful as I can before I say it on this microphone, right? Like, I don't want to say something on the mic that isn't accurate or true, and it then influences someone's health decision making in a negative way. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I have definitely made mistakes in content. We have talked about it on this show, times that I have changed my thinking. If you go back and listen to some earlier episodes, you may find a later episode where I talk about a correction or talk about why I have changed my thinking on something. So we do the best that we can, I think, to make ethical content. You've got to be honest about the context and give good information so people can make good decisions for themselves. So some very, very popular content creators are now out there saying, no, you don't need sunscreen at all. Not maybe the stuff in the sunscreen that you're using could be harmful, but sunscreen in itself as a premise is harmful. Don't wear it at all. And then a particular mega popular, like one of the most popular health podcasts on the planet, who I'm not going to name because I like my job, went on to say, not only don't wear sunscreen at all, but he made a claim that there is a study that has been published showing that the most common chemical, I mentioned it to you a moment ago, oxybenzone, is not only in our blood, but can cross what's known as the blood-brain barrier, right? So you have a barrier between your bloodstream and your actual brain that filters out stuff that might not be that harmful to like your liver or your kidneys or your intestines or your muscles, but that could damage the brain. And there are some compounds that cross the blood-brain barrier that can be detrimental to our brains, like our literal ability to function in the world. And so this person claimed that there is a study that oxybenzone can cross the blood-brain barrier and that 10 years after exposure, it is still present in the brain, which sounds bad, right? Just saying that sentence. If you're like, oh, this synthetic chemical is in my brain. But I want to break this whole argument down for you just to illustrate the way that sciencey sounding things can influence our behavior if we don't understand what's actually going on under the hood. So first, that content creator, when they have made false claims in the past, will either provide, like disputed claims. When they've made disputed claims in the past, they will provide citations to say like, well, this is the study I'm basing it on. Or they'll go, ooh, you know what? I was wrong on that one. Let's do a correction. In this case, they have never produced a citation. So you know what I did? I went looking. I went digging into everything I could find on oxybenzone and the blood-brain barrier. For context, oxybenzone is what's known as organic synthetic chemical compound, right? So it acts on an organism, organic, carbon-based life form, us. Synthetic, it's made artificially. So it's an organic synthetic chemical compound, okay? And it absorbs UV light. Great, that's what we want, right, in a chemical sunscreen. And UV light being the harmful part that modifies our DNA, causes mutations, and can result in cancer down the line. Okay, also sounds good so far. Oxybenzone is also a stabilizer. So when it's added to chemical compounds, different formulations, it prevents things from separating or deteriorating faster. So that compound isn't only in sunscreen. We're going to get to that in just a second. So some chemical sunscreens have compounds that have been shown to cross the blood-brain barrier. Oxybenzone has not. I was not able to find a study. I was able to find meta-analyses that mention sunscreen chemicals collectively. And then when you read deeper into the study, it talks about other compounds, but I was not able to find a reference of oxybenzone crossing the blood-brain barrier. Oxybenzone does get absorbed by the skin, and it has been found in some large population studies to be in 90% of the population's urine samples. 90% of the population has oxybenzone on board. I doubt that 90% of the population is wearing chemical sunscreen every day. So how did it get there? Well, it's in lots of other stuff. Liquid hand soap as a stabilizer, right? To keep the liquids in the pump soap from separating. Lip balm, lipstick, foundation, concealer, nail polish, anything with artificial fragrance, toys, furniture. Oxybenzone is everywhere in a synthetic life that most of us are living at this point, let's be honest. So this influencer claimed that there was a study that showed that not only did it cross the blood-brain barrier, but that it showed up in the brains of people 10 years after they stopped wearing sunscreen. So the problem with this is, from a study design perspective, and the normal population, how would you possibly know this, right? Like, I know this because I study these things. But if you don't know that much about study design, that sounds really like, oh yeah, it crosses the blood-brain barrier. Oh my God, it's found in 10 years later. It's still in my brain. It would be incredibly, like nearly impossible to ensure that people had not used a public bathroom and had a pump hand soap for 10 years, or they didn't use a scented lotion sample at a hotel for 10 years, or the body wash at the hotel for 10 years. So the control of the behavior isn't available because it's in all kinds of stuff. And that also, the third reason I think is ridiculous is the study doesn't exist. That study doesn't exist. So this very popular creator makes this very scary claim about our brains and sunblock, and then goes on to say that you shouldn't wear sunscreen anyway because it disrupts vitamin D production. We're going to get to that in just a second. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I am your host, Darlene Marshall. And now that I have set the stage for you on the sunscreen debate, how did we get here? Well, when a very popular, a mega popular podcaster says something like that, you're going to get all kinds of other people who are content creators who then are like, ooh, that's a juicy nugget. Now I have a hot take. And they go off and they make TikTok videos and Instagram posts and posts on X or Threads and LinkedIn. And they start repeating this thing that they've heard from a person that they pedestal, that they believe to be a credible person. And suddenly there are hundreds, thousands of people out there saying the same thing. And the general public's window of what they think is true begins to shift because they're hearing it over and over and over again. So let's really look at some questions now that we understand how we got to the sunscreen debate. Is oxybenzone bad for humans? And are there other chemical substances in sunscreen that are bad for humans? And do you need to be wearing sunscreen? Like, what is the pros and the cons of sunscreen in itself? And have those claims been made in good faith? I can't say about their motivation, but I can say like those claims about things like vitamin D and hormones, and how does that affect your health and decision making? So part of why I find the blood-brain barrier argument so annoying, so irritating, or even just the oxybenzone is in my blood and my urine and I need to keep it out of my body so I won't touch sunscreen. We don't have any evidence that oxybenzone itself is messing with the brain. We're going to talk about what we do know in just a second. And it's not just in sunscreen, it's in so many other things. And what I find totally bonkers is the number of people out there doing other things that oxybenzone is in. So is it bad for us? Well, fortunately, science has the answer. In February of 2020, while we were all busy doing something else called the Rona, a systematic review published in the Journal of Dermatology was called, quote, "The Banned Sunscreen Ingredients and Their Impact on Human Health," a systematic review. And what it was looking at is the effects of oxybenzone and octinoxate on human health. Are you ready? Here we go. Quote, there are 29 studies that address the impact of these ingredients on human health. Studies show that elevated systemic levels of BP3, which is the chemical compound made for oxybenzone, so systemic levels of oxybenzone, has no adverse effect on male and female fertility, female productive hormone health, adiposity, which is a science word for fat, fetal growth, child's neurological development, and sexual maturation. However, the association of oxybenzone level on thyroid hormone, testosterone level, kidney function, and puberty timing has been reported and prompts further investigation to validate a true association. The systemic absorption of OMC, that's octinoxate, has no reported effect on thyroid and reproductive hormone levels. Current evidence is not sufficient to support the causal relationship between the elevated levels of these two compounds and adverse health outcomes. There are either contradictory findings among different studies or insufficient number of studies to corroborate the observed association. To accurately evaluate the long-term risk, a well-designed longitudinal randomized controlled trial needs to be conducted. All right, translation on what that all means. There is an association that is starting to appear, but it is unclear if it is a causal thing or if there's something else that is damaging us when we use these chemical sunscreens. So we don't have a clear idea. What we do know is there is an association. High levels of oxybenzone are associated with these negative things. So thyroid hormone dysfunction, testosterone level, kidney function, and puberty timing. That doesn't sound very good to me. But I've said before on this show that I don't think my job is to tell you what to do. I think my job is to give you good information so that you can find your line of what's right for you and the people you love and your family. So you know what's not at all up for debate about any of these chemicals is their effect on the environment. These chemicals definitely, unquestionably, bleach coral reefs and affect the reproductive cycles of marine life, thereby speeding ecological collapse and the negative effects of humans on the planet. So that is without a doubt true, right? And then that brings us to one more great big question. So we've established, we don't know for sure that these chemicals are hurting our brains, but they might be hurting our endocrine systems, and they're definitely hurting our planet. Do you need to be wearing any sunscreen at all as opposed to just avoiding chemical sunscreens? That's our last big question. Now, some of these very popular influencers are saying that you do not need to wear sunscreen. And as I alluded to a moment ago, the number of these people out here saying, oxybenzone is so bad for you, don't wear sunscreen, but they are wearing makeup. Their nails are done. They've got fake tanner. All of those things have oxybenzone in them. And personally, when I come to the realization that a content creator might be a hypocrite, I start to take less stock in what they have to say. And it is very possible that these people don't know that their nail polish, their eyeshadow, their lip balm, their fake tanner all have oxybenzone in them, their eyelash glue. Maybe they don't know, but if they don't know that, then they probably shouldn't be talking about sunscreen either, in my opinion. Okay, so let me drop some stats on you about sunscreen and your health. 7,000 people a year die of melanoma. It is a preventable skin cancer in most cases. There are some rare forms of melanoma that are totally random, but most melanomas are caused by sun exposure, and 7,000 people a year in the United States die of it. While that 7,000 is not a huge number, it'll feel real big if it's you or someone you love, right? If you're the person going through it or the person you love is watching you go through it, then it feels one is enough. And 1 in 5 people in the United States will develop skin cancer in their lifetimes. I personally know 3 people, one of whom is under the age of 40, who have had it cut out of their faces recently. And in fact, tomorrow, from the day I am recording this, so it won't be tomorrow for you, but it's tomorrow for me, I'm taking my grandmother to the dermatologist to get a patch removed above her eyebrow. So as I said in the intro, it's very common in my family, and I do not want that for myself. So that's your big pro, is not getting skin cancer. But what about the con, right? Because so many content creators are out there saying it prevents the production of vitamin D. And if you didn't know, vitamin D is not just something that we absorb when we eat food. Vitamin D is a hormone that your body produces. So according to the Skin Cancer Foundation, there are no clinical studies that demonstrate a lack of vitamin D production due to wearing sunscreen. And that is because the body only needs a small amount of UV exposure to make vitamin D. Their most recent studies that I could find on this was published in the end of 2019 and called The Effect of Sunscreen on Vitamin D. And it was very clear that we have no clinical evidence because you only need a little bit of UV on board. And that little bit of UV is actually getting through the sunscreen enough to produce vitamin D. So you don't need a lot of time. You don't need a lot of exposure. So what do I personally do? When I'm going to be in the sun a lot, I use a zinc oxide mineral sunblock. I buy it like a paste, so that way it's not in a lotion with some other stabilizer in it that I don't know what's in it. Yeah, it's a little thick and heavy. It's sometimes difficult to scrub off because it's very water resistant, which is nice. It doesn't need to be reapplied as often. And when I started to learn a few years ago the information about cosmetics that I have shared in this episode, I reduced the frequency that I wear makeup. I don't get my nails done unless I have a special event to prepare for. I changed the cleaning products in my house. I switched to bar soap instead of pump soap. I will use pump soap if I'm in a public bathroom and that's my only option. But other than that, I avoid it. And I don't use things in the house that have an artificial scent because I'm trying to reduce my exposure to these chemicals. Yes, I am serious. I do all of these things. I don't think I'm crazy. Some other people do. Because many of these chemicals have a negative impact on the endocrine system. And if you don't know, your endocrine system is hormonal and sexual function. So your endocrine system is pumping out all of your hormones. Some of those hormones are reproductive. I am a woman who has not yet had my children. And so it's a really big deal to me to keep reproductive health. And so for me, that meant reducing my exposure to chemicals that would disrupt my endocrine system. So yeah, mineral sunblock isn't sexy, but who cares? And instead of those like household sprays and scented candles, we use essential oil diffusers, not because I think that they're going to cure cancer in this case. And not because I think the essential oils are going to cure melanoma, because it's nice to have a house that smells nice. That's it. It's just pleasant, and pleasant is enough to be soothing and have a positive benefit, right? So personally, I just switched to mineral sunblocks. I don't think it's that big of a lift. And the debate mostly I find is people making hot takes for the internet so that they can get clicks and listens. And then you might ask yourself, well, why would they do that? Well, in the case of these mega influencers, they're in service of sponsorships, right? It's how they make their money. And so if I get more people to listen because I think I have a hot take, my sponsors are getting more listens. If I have a revenue share or I'm part owner of those companies, then I'm making more money. The more listens I get, the higher conversion because you think I'm cool and I've got a hot take and it's interesting or whatever. That's how influencer culture works. And so what I encourage you as you encounter what seems like hot take and rogue ideas out on the internet is to ask yourself, what is this person really selling? NASM produces this show. I get paid for them to produce the show. What I'm really selling is a set of ethics and ideas about wellness and well-being because I want you and all of us to live better. That's it, right? But I want to leave you with a quote from Baz Luhrmann's Everybody's Free. Nostalgia for my elder millennials and my exennials out there. Are you ready? Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen of the class of 99, wear sunscreen. If I could offer you only one tip for the future, sunscreen would be it. The long-term benefits of sunscreen have been proved by scientists, whereas the rest of my advice has no basis more reliable than my own meandering experience, which I will dispense this advice now. End quote. If you have feedback or advice, well, I would love to hear it. So you go ahead and reach out. If you want to email me, it's info@darlene.coach. I am also on Instagram @darlene.coach. You can find me on LinkedIn, where I publish weekly articles about wellness and well-being, or sign up for our Substack. It's betterthanfine.substack.com. If you're a fan of the show, I hope that you've already subscribed or left us a review or sent it to your bestie and said, hey, I told you should be wearing sunscreen. And I also want to add one final plug that regardless of the color of your skin, sunscreen still prevents the development of skin cancers. So to my Black and brown friends, this all applies to you too. Thank you so much. Take good care of yourself, wear your sunscreen, and be well.